Welcome to the Honest Field Guide podcast, a weekly show dedicated to winning in entrepreneurship. I'm your host, Ginger Birkenbuhl. I'm the CEO of Burt Creative, a leadership, brand strategy, and visual identity agency dedicated to helping scale brands and assist with their adaptability with the market. On my show, you get to eavesdrop in on intimate conversation with business leaders and inspired entrepreneurs, designed to give you tips and strategies so your own business can thrive. Subscribe and join me each week for laughter, inspiration, and honest stories. Hey everybody, welcome back to my show, the Honest Field Guide podcast. I'm your host, Ginger Birkenbuhl, a creative marketer, songwriter, mom of 3 sons, wife, and yes, even an entrepreneur. It's wild. It's wild. Thank you for joining me today again. You could be listening to any podcast in the world. You could be listening to anything in the world, frankly, if you'd like to. But now you're choosing to listen to mine, and I really do appreciate it. So if you could share my show with your community, tag the Honest Field Guide. You can even tag Ginger Birkenbuhl. I have a couple handles on Instagram, Ask Ginger. I also have a TikTok. I'm all over LinkedIn. And if you could also leave a 4-star review anywhere that you listen to podcasts, that would be fantastic, because every time you leave something positive for me and my show, it's always, of course, great for my guests. All right. So here's the deal. So ever since I've had my show, and I started my show back in 2018, back in the day, before the blip, if you're a Marvel fan, you know what I mean when I say the blip, before the blip, I had a podcast, and my show started off with, I was just really interviewing. I was actually talking to myself and talking to my former employee, who was really amazing, by the way. I don't know what she's doing now because everything's changed since 2020, but launched the show, really was sharing my insights and ideas about, how to do things based on entrepreneurship, how to start a small business, why you should be careful about what you like and don't like on Instagram, places like that. I mean, just had a lot of really great conversations. Even had a podcast about supplier diversity and the total ridiculousness and absurdity of it and how it doesn't work and it's never worked and it never will work. And of course, look where we are today. Diversity, equity, inclusion. It's it's breaking. It actually was never working, but whatever. And then I started interviewing people, and all the people I was interviewing, of course, and I shouldn't say of course, because unless you've been listening to my show for a while, and I have a lot of great fans, thank you for listening again to my regulars. I interview guests, and you would know, based on everything I've ever said, that all the guests I've ever had on my show are guests that are curated by me. I have talked to people because I meet people on the road when I'm working, when I'm traveling, or people in my network in Chicago. And I'm like, oh my God, you'd be so great on my show. And I bring them on my show and I have great conversations. Like last week, I had the opportunity to interview Michael Alter, who owns the Chicago Sky. And he's someone in my network, and it's really beautiful. So here's the other thing. You also know that I don't take pitches. I've never, ever, ever, ever taken a pitch on my show. I get a ton of people asking to come on because I have a great show. Pat myself on the back. Women have to give themselves accolades. I'm giving myself one. I've never taken a pitch. And I've always bragged about it, oh yeah, you have to really be special to come on my show because I just don't take anybody. And I've had some people criticize me on YouTube, well, who do you think you are? Who do you think? Nobody cares about you. I'm like, well, you know what? I care about me, and I care about my mental health, and I care about what I bring into my spirit, what I manifest, and who I bring into my world. This is the first time I've ever broken my rule. I actually got a pitch, and I read it, and I was like, okay, first of all, I didn't know the thing that there's this thing called punch needle, and I was like, what exactly? I have no idea what punch needle is, no clue at all. And that was the first thing that intrigued me, because you all know that I talk a lot about curiosity and how things really interest me. And I'm just like, okay, what is this thing? What does it mean? How do I find out more? And then a lot of times I go down a rabbit hole and I never come back. And so I got this thing and I was like, okay, what is punch needle? So I looked it up and I was like, wow, this is a really punch needle rug hook or something, some kind of American craft thing. And I was like, what is it? And then I looked up the woman who was being pitched and I thought, wow, she's really interesting. She's doing some really cool stuff. And I thought, maybe this is the first time that I'm going to have somebody on that I don't know, I've never met before, but the sort of email was really, really intriguing to me. It's funny too. When I think about my own curiosity, I've always been sort of, as a child, I've always been very curious, and I'm a rebel. Like when I've been in classrooms, I'm like demanding the teacher explain themselves. I also remember this one time I was in a meeting a long time ago. It was at my kid's school. And I was asking a lot of questions in this parent meeting. And there was one woman, she like jumped up and shouted, "Why does this matter? Why are you asking so many questions? Who cares?" And I was like, you know what? You are not my people, because I like to know stuff, because it helps me become a better human. And, part of it also is that I have a company, and the more I know, the more I can do better to help my agency customers. I can bring more value. So anyway, I'm gonna read the pitch that came in. It said, Micah Clasper Torch is an artist, designer, and educator helping to lead the revival of punch needle rug hooking, a uniquely American craft that was nearly forgotten after the rise of mass manufacturing. And then I read more. Why slowing down and working with our hands is more relevant than ever. And I thought to myself, this is perfect, because like I said, I've never heard of punch needle rug hooking. I've seen it, but I've never heard of it. I didn't even know it was like, I just took it for granted. But I also really love the idea of working with our hands, because it really, to me, is more relevant than ever. I feel like we're losing a lot of human craftsmanship. We're in an era where everything's being automated. And I feel like even our thoughts are being automated, and like these AI tools are like executing on our thoughts, and it's scary. So I thought to myself, wouldn't it be interesting as I was watching all these videos of, punch needle rug hooking, I was like, who can do this? Who has the concentration? Who has the strength and the conviction to do something beautiful like this, and just sort of, and we're going to find out more. So I'm going to read a little bit about Micah, because she is my guest today, Micah Clasper Torch. I cannot wait to talk to her, because I need to know more. Should I become this, punch needle rug hooker? Should I hooker? I feel like that's a weird way to put it. No, I'm not saying that, but you heard what I just said. Okay, Micah Clasper Torch is a Los Angeles-based artist, designer, and educator helping to lead the modern revival of punch needle rug hooking. With a background in fashion design from the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York City and a school in Milano, Italy, Micah blends fine art, heritage craft, and wearable design to create a one-of-a-kind textile pieces that range from coats and accessories to wall hangings and self-sculpture. Micah is credited with debuting the first punch needle coat in 2018, merging her fashion background with this arts, craft, and helping to drive the modern resurgence of punch needle art. Micah also has a debut book, and you all know I love books, Punch Needle Fashion, where she demonstrates how she brings punch needle into the world of contemporary fashion through 15 original projects. We're going to talk about that as well. So welcome, Micah.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here, especially after that intro. That was amazing. Thanks, Ginger.
All right. So listen, before we get to your backstory, I am really curious. When people have no idea who you are or what you've accomplished, and I'm just trying to think, like, if there's a little kid, talking to you or trying to say, "What do you do?" Like, what do you say?
Well, that's the whole thing, right? Punch needle. It's always that I have to take a breath. People say, "What do you do?" And I pause for a moment, because I know it's like, well, I'm a punch needle artist and designer and run a company. And I pause for a moment, and it's just crickets. So, usually I then have to launch into a whole description, or finally, for the first time, I've actually started carrying around a handbag that I made. So now if I'm in person with people, I can just be like, this actually, and point to the textile. This is what I do. But it is interesting being in a niche where people definitely have no idea what I'm talking about most of the time.
Yeah. Do you have something next to you that you could actually pull up and show me right now? Do you have something right next to you that you could grab?
I don't actually. I usually do. I'm in a different location, since I'm trying to have a little bit more quiet for the podcast. But
oh, I love it. Well, I wish I'll figure something out when I bring this live. I want to kind of, have this bag, or have a bag, or whatever you're going to bring up, so that people can see what it is. And for anybody that has no idea and now is absolutely curious and dying to know, as you're listening to the show, what words should someone type in the internet to actually see pictures?
So, punch needle in general is a craft where a hollow metal needle pushes like thread or yarn, or sometimes strips of fabric through a backing to create a dense, like looped textile, usually used for making rugs. So punch needle rug hooking specifically, it looks like a looped rug, or if you've seen tufted rugs, like now, is exploding all over TikTok and Instagram, Reels and everything. You see people with the tufting gun. The tufting gun was created to mimic the look of punch needle, which is what I do by hand. So with yarn, and it's looped and it's dense and it looks like a rug. So if you put in punch needle or punch needle rug hooking, you'll see all sorts of beautiful textiles, everything from very crafty looking pieces to more, interesting kind of art pieces. And there's a lot of innovation happening now that's really pushing the craft in all sorts of new directions. So
Wow.
it's pretty varied what will come up on
Okay.
through Google.
So punch needle is what someone should type in.
Yes.
Right. And they can look at this while we're having this conversation. I love it. Okay. So before we kind of get into your creative process and talk about your different, entrepreneurial pursuits, because you have so many, I would love to know, where and how did you grow up? Were you the only artist in your family? Was everyone an artist? Were there no artists? Did anyone in your family own a business? So talk a little bit about and I'm talking early. I'm not talking like high school. I'm talking, your pre-K to sixth age range.
Yeah, I was always a very creative kid. My mother is a musician, and my father was a teacher, and my aunts were very artistic as well. So, I mean, my family loved creativity. My dad used to paint when he was young, and actually now in retirement, he's gone back to painting. So that was encouraged. One of my aunts is a watercolor painter. The other one does incredible quilting and sews. So I grew up with creativity being very much encouraged. And I wouldn't say crafting, somehow that I never would have seen myself as a crafter at that time. And no one I knew worked with yarn or fiber or knitted or anything. But sewing and painting and drawing were all things I did growing up. And I am one of two kids. I have a younger sister. And we often, when my mom was playing music, we would go with her to her shows and we would be left to entertain ourselves. And it was always either reading books or drawing and kind of, making up little crafts and things on our own. So we also didn't grow up with a television. So what else was there to do but draw and make things? So I credit that with a lot of my early creativity was having to entertain myself. And early on, I loved, a lot of drawing, a lot of all that, but also early on, one of the things I think about now a lot in relation to punch needle and rug hooking, because the history is one of resourcefulness and using what one has on hand. And I think back into the early years, I made a lot of art from things in the recycling bin. I would make all these weird sculptures and glue things together. And I did a lot of jewelry design with found sea glass and things that I would come across on the beach in New England. So that was the early days.
So where did the sewing come in though?
So I was really interested in both fashion design and interior design by the time I got to middle school. Yeah, by the time I got to middle school. And I was the only person in my school, this was pre, Project Runway, all this stuff. And I went to a school that was very heavily sports and academic oriented. And I loved that for school. And I just didn't have a lot of other people around me who I saw doing this kind of stuff. But I would draw furniture design, and then I would also draw clothing. And I think a lot of it also just came out of things that I wish I could have had or worn.
Really?
Yeah. And so that was this, but I didn't know how to sew, and my mom didn't sew, and I didn't learn from her. So it really was more in the design that my interest in fashion came around. But by the end of high school, I began to learn a little bit to sew before I ended up going to FIT, the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York City, that's where I really learned to sew. But I figured I should know the basics by then. So that's how it came in, through fashion design.
So I love the sewing piece because I feel like the last few conversations I've had with people in the fashion world, they've all had a relationship with sewing. And I'm going to have to dig a little deeper into that at some other time because I almost feel like you either are raised in an environment of sewing or something around you is making you is drawing you to sewing because I have three children and one of my three sons for whatever reason I don't know why he sews things and he did like you he did not grow up in a family of sewers. Like my mother was like anti-sewing. She was anti-sewing, anti-ironing, anti-housework. Like, she grew up in the World War II era. And I don't know, like she's got some weird things. Like no, seriously, I never learned like domesticated things outside of cooking from scratch. Like that's the extent of my like learning things like that. But I do want to ask you, I'm just thinking about, I recently watched a documentary called Piece by Piece by Pharrell. Have you heard of this documentary? Have you seen it?
I have heard of it. I have not seen it.
You should check it out because it's like Pharrell. Of course, you know who Pharrell Williams is, but um, it's put in a Lego format. It's like Lego format with his story because he's got that big time movie that put him over the top. But what I loved about watching the show was he understood that he was different when he was growing up. Like he felt he was destined for something magnificent, right? He didn't, I don't know that he knew he couldn't articulate that he was an artist and he wasn't from a family of artists like it sounds like you were. But he was like, it's like he was looking out the window or something, kind of like Lupe Fiasco. And he's like, there's another world out there and the world I'm in right now is not it, but I'm going to that world. So given that you did not grow up with sewers, although you had parents your mother was a musician, right?
Yeah.
Okay. How did you feel when you were little about your own creativity? It sounds like it was extremely supported, right? But did you feel like, did you always know you were going to be an artist? Did you actually visualize I'm an artist? I know I'm an artist. I feel it. This is going to be my life. Or were you just kind of going with the flow because your mother was a rock star?
I did. That's a good question because while I had a family that was very supportive of being creative, fashion design was very foreign to them as something that I was interested in. And I think if I had said I wanted to be a fine artist, the idea of being an artist was scary to them, as being the first child who was going off to school and this idea of, oh my gosh, we just want you to like have a steady job. And the irony being that, they were creative. And I thought, how could my parents, not support this? But I think there was a little bit of that fear, but also growing up, just the fashion is not something that my parents were interested in all. They were like, where did you get this interest? Why are you into fashion? I think they thought it was a little bit frivolous, not very serious and didn't know and maybe understand what that then looked like as a creative career. So I didn't, in that regard, I felt a little bit misunderstood in the fashion interest. And so kind of had to like fight my way into like, I'm going to art school. I'm doing this. There was a lot of like, we want you to apply to schools that have both, the traditional liberal arts program and a fashion program. And I was really intent on going to New York City and studying design. So it all worked out. And I think they came around pretty quickly once I was in school and I just fell in love with it. And I was, putting my stuff in fashion shows and I was doing all this stuff above and beyond. And they were like, okay, you're where you should be. But yeah, there was definitely a little bit of early pushback. And yet I always saw myself as someone I knew I wanted to pursue something and I think I saw it just in fashion design as I was growing up, but something creative. That's all I knew, that I had to be creative.
I just love that. I think, what I'm hearing more and more is just the conviction of a young person, the conviction, the absolute, this is how I'm feeling and just keeping going without, any barriers, even if it's your parents or not. So I really love that. And it's interesting too, because I would never have imagined a parent that's a musician. You know what I mean? That would kind of be like, what? What? Huh? What are we talking about here? Because I just feel like that is, if anything, like a potential career where you're out there with a tin cup.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, I don't know. I mean, are your parents famous? Are they famous rock people? Have they,
No,
what is going on?
My mom, and this was also, my mom had other part-time jobs alongside her music for a long
Had
time when
to.
I was growing up. And of course, she was spending a lot of time taking care of my sister and I. And she played in various configurations and different bands, and also was a studio musician on other artists' CDs. So in the, you know, New England, Rhode Island scene, she plays violin, fiddle, and also does piano and everything, but mostly fiddle when she's out performing. So in that scene, she's known. But again, yeah, it was very much smaller. And I think, yeah, it is surprising when,
Yeah, I mean, I'm like trying to figure it out because I'm just trying to figure it out because like I'm just like I mean, my husband and I, we're musicians, and I feel like it's funny because on the other hand, I think about I was like, you want to play football? Like I want you to go to art school, bro. Like you're not gonna play football. And now here I've got like a hockey player and a volleyball player. I have one artist. I have a jazz pianist, so he's my oldest. So,
Amazing.
anyway, so I am. I do want to talk about high school because high school is horrible. It's like I don't. I mean, you know what? I shouldn't assume it was horrible for you. You might have had the most stupendous high school experience of your whole life, and it's like the highlight of your entire experience. I don't know, but
No.
like I know, right? I mean, high school is the worst. But so when you were in high school, at this point, it sounds like what you're saying is that you obviously weren't fully realized, but you were an artist. You were entering into high school. There was athletics. I get the East Coast vibe because my youngest is going to boarding school actually in New Hampshire for hockey. But what type of teachers do you have in high school? Did you have one that inspired you? Was there someone that was a real big part of your life, or did that not come until college?
I think that didn't really come until later.
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
high school was
Fair.
was great for what it was, but not for what I really wanted to do. I'd say there wasn't a lot for people who were interested in art in the way that I was. And now that my school has changed a lot, and it's been fun to see and hear about how that's shifted. And they've done a lot in regards to, um, expanding the ability for their students to be creative and expand the art program, performing arts. But at the time, it definitely I felt a little bit out of place. And so I didn't really bring a lot of that into school. I played sports, I did academics. Everyone that knew me knew that I would draw. And I had an art teacher who helped me, of course, putting together my portfolio to apply to art schools, which was so helpment to
That's
have
big.
that support. So it was there. But I remember when I ended up getting into FIT, and I was sharing it with some teacher was coming around who wasn't my teacher, but was asking some of us who were seniors at the time where we were going to school. And I shared that I was going to FIT, and she kind of looked at me, and it was this funny, like, I think the feeling that I got was kind of like the only people that go to art school are people that like don't do well in like academics. And it was kind of this confusion because I was a fine student. Like there was no reason that, and I remember that was a little, painful moment, but also I knew that I was going to be with my people soon at art school and in New York City in general, where I think dreaming bigger and having these ideas. And so I did. I found those people.
I love it, and yeah, high school is just awful. I don't know. I just, I mean, and I feel like now, can you imagine what your experience would have been like if there had been mobile devices? Because I just think that, these mobile devices, they are, I think, interrupting and interfering with young people's creativity in ways that I never, ever, ever, I mean, I feel like it's horrible. I
Yeah.
think that someone like you that's a sponge for visuals and creativity and innovation and invention, to actually be fed it all day long now, where you're not actually having the opportunity to cultivate your own.
Yes.
That's what worries me about today's environment. Like, how do we get more Micahs if they're, being interrupted by the AI and the social media stuff?
I think that's so true, because even for me, like I went to FIT, and at first I got really nervous because I went to FIT and I hadn't even like read Vogue regularly. Like I had seen it, but again, my parents were like not into me like looking at fashion magazines and just thought it was kind of like, I think, superficial and frivolous. So I went there and all of a sudden I was in class with people who had been like reading the magazines cover to cover for years, and they were keeping up with all the collections that were coming out of the runways. I felt so out of the loop, and all of a sudden I thought, oh my gosh, like what do I have to bring to the table? Because if I don't know all of this stuff, but in fact, I found that because I didn't absorb what was happening, what I was bringing was a fresh perspective from kind of all these other myriad of places and just life experience. And then once I got into fashion school, I had to learn how to actually not um, like take space away from inspiration, because it's so easy for the things that we're just absorbing to influence us in ways that are not conscious. It's one thing to kind of consciously pick and choose, but then as you're saying, even for myself now, I think, what is this coming from me, or is this just something I've seen, or is that something I really want to pursue, or am I just seeing other people doing that and then getting a little bit of FOMO and thinking I've got to jump on board too? And it takes time and attention to actually step back and put that barrier up so that we can cultivate our own creativity these days.
Yeah, and you're a grown-ass woman, so you have the brain capacity and facility to make a choice like that, right? That's kind of the worrisome part. FIT is like really hard to get into. I mean, I'm just like, I interviewed a woman a couple years ago. Her name is Dana Esom Johnson, and she works for Etsy.
Yes,
Etsy. Do you know about her? She's a judge.
I've met her. Yeah, I know her.
You did meet her. She
So
went
nice.
there. Yeah, she went there, and I just remember her saying that was such a transformative experience. She's from East Coast too,
Yeah.
and not like New York East Coast, like you, like rural, kind of thing. And people were like, "You're going to do what and do where and go what and how what?" It was just like, but it was very transformative for her, and I feel like it helped you as well. But then from FIT, and I mean, yeah, maybe one day you can like tell everybody what are the tips to get into FIT. Maybe it's different now, but you went to you studied in Italy, and I don't want to mispronounce the school that you studied in, but did you do that through FIT? Tell me about this Milano,
Yes.
Italy educational experience.
Yeah, so that was through FIT. It was at the Politecnico di Milano, which is the Polytechnic Institute in Milan, which is well known for design. And it was the first year actually that they did this program for fashion design students in Milan instead of in Florence, where they had a longstanding relationship with Polymoda, a school there in Florence. I had known that I wanted to study abroad, and it was really this interesting kind of first year experience. It felt kind of like, again, I guess we had little Nokia brick cell phones, but it was pre all of this kind of stuff. And we were just dropped in with not a lot of support. When I think back on it now, oh my gosh, how did we even navigate that? But it really was just living in Italy. We had to find apartments in Italy, and we went to the school there, and we had a mix of Italian classes and classes in English with teachers that were through FIT. And that was an amazing experience also, because that year is where half of the year we focused on knitwear. So we even learned to knit by hand, which I was awful at, which is funny because now running a craft company, Punch Needle World, in this space with Punch Needle, which is very adjacent to knitting and crochet. It's funny to think back on that early experience where I was hopeless at hand knitting. We also did knitting machine work, and that was an incredible experience of learning to make our own textiles to create with. So previously at FIT, of course, I'm learning to sew, and I'm loving working with wool and other types of fabric to drape and create pieces on a dress form. But then in Milan, that was really my first experience with the idea of starting, like, let's take a step back and I can actually create my own textile and then turn that into a wearable garment. And it didn't come back around until now, but working with Punch Needle and that idea of creating a textile that I'm then transforming into a wearable or accessory, it really makes me rethink back at that time. And I think I draw a lot from that experience.
I love it. The seeds were planted. That's so cool. So I'm curious. That doesn't sound like that's where your spark came from. Like, where did the spark actually come when did it happen? Do you remember? Like, do you remember when,
For
like,
punch needle?
yes, do you
Oh,
remember
yeah.
having like a epiphany or something like, this is it? Like, what, talk about that moment. Because
Yeah.
some people miss their moment. It's like, I
Yeah.
tell my kids, like, I'm like, there is, the portal is real. Like, there is a portal, and you have to be attentive to your body responses and your mind and your feeling, so you don't miss that window, that portal. I'm not saying there's never going to be another portal again, but that might be the main one.
Yeah. I like that analogy. I mean, and it's kind of a roundabout experience because I didn't discover punch needle and start working with punch needle until, um, well, I discovered it, I came across it in 2017 and then really began working with it in 2018. But I mean, I graduated FIT in 2009. So in between there, it was like I worked at an art gallery, it was like the middle of the recession. So like I was like taking whatever job I could get. It wasn't in the fashion industry at the time. Worked at an art gallery. I then ended up working at Coach for a handful of years doing hardware design for their handbags. Realized I did not like working in corporate fashion industry.
You
That
think?
wasn't for me. And then I got really into like the startup world. So that was also like in that boom in New York days where it was like everyone was doing startups and they were all getting backed. And I did some work with Bonobos in their early guide shop years. So I like was selling, clothing and learning about how these startups worked while I ended up like leaving Coach to start my own company in like an e-commerce startup. So I got really into the idea of business as well. And so that's where I think this like business and creativity kind of balance came in. And I realized at that time, after working in corporate fashion design, I thought, well, I'm a creative person, but what I thought this industry would be doesn't actually feel very creative to me. And maybe there are other ways to be creative, even if it doesn't look like a traditional creative job. And so to me, entrepreneurship and startups felt very creative, even though it wasn't making by hand or anything like that. And again, this was early pre-Instagram. So I think I had thought that my dream of actually making pieces, one of a kind pieces by hand, was just never going to become a viable business. And it was only in 2017 when,
So wait, I'm sorry. You were thinking about making individual pieces back in 2009, but then you're like, where does this actually going to happen? There's no, this isn't scalable. I'm going to be sewing all my life, like the
yes,
woman who sewed the American flag, and nothing's going to happen. And
yes,
that was in your brain until 2017.
yes, basically. So graduating from FIT, I was like, I love making pieces. I did a lot of small collections that I put in fashion shows, and I loved the process of making the garments. And it got to the point where I would have some stuff in a fashion show, and there would be buyers that would come up to me and say, "This is wonderful. Like, where can we order to stock your pieces?" And I thought, well, I'm not interested in getting my pieces like produced. I make them, and that's not how it works in the fashion industry. And I realized I thought I was being just rational and, well, this doesn't work as a business. And I didn't see that being done. I didn't know how it would work for me without, Instagram and the internet being what it is today. I didn't see any way that I could reach the customers that I would want to reach. So I thought my only option was going into more traditional, fashion or art or startup jobs. And yet I always was creating on the side. So I then would just create pieces for myself. And then I would share them through Instagram. And I had an Instagram account that I was sharing some of these things. But it wasn't a serious thing at all until I moved to Los Angeles from New York. I was the business development director for a startup that threw events and did a lot of, I was doing a lot of brand partnership stuff for them. Loved that job, but I was working then remotely from my team in New York and working largely East Coast hours. So at some point then I would have, by 3 or 4 in the afternoon LA time, my day would free up. And so I went back to kind of creating these one-of-a-kind pieces. And that's when I began integrating kind of different textile techniques and in particular heritage craft like quilting, embroidery, and seeing, how could I work on the pieces I'm doing to make them more one of a kind and really viewing them as art pieces at that time more than fashion pieces, because me making them by hand was just not going to compete with the production that was happening. And when I came across punch needle, on Instagram, as many people do. I thought, oh, that's so interesting. As a textile, it kind of looks like fur or something. It's a rug technique. It might be a really fun thing to integrate into one coat. I was integrating a few things, one off here and there. I thought it was going to be like one and done. I was like, going to learn this technique, make it into one coat, and then just move on. And it took me a long time to find a teacher, and there wasn't a lot of good information online at the time. So I finally found this teacher down near San Diego, and I went down and I had her teach me the technique. And that's when the light bulb moment was.
Who's the teacher?
It was down. So Christy Benison, she did punch rug hooking. She's also a certified Oxford punching instructor. And she's the one who told me when I fell in love with the craft, if you really want to learn this, you should go to Vermont and study with Amy Oxford, who really then became like my mentor and the person who kind of, when you asked about teachers beforehand, I feel like she's the first teacher that I really had that made an impact in the way that other people might have experienced in high school or college.
So tell me again, she encouraged you in what way? And what did she see that she said, oh yeah, you got to go here?
So Christy taught me punching, and I came in saying, I do fashion design. I want to learn this to make a coat out of it. Like I was determined, like that was what I was doing. But as I learned the craft, I just saw all these possibilities for this. I thought, why is this not more of a thing? It's a relatively simple technique. Like once you get the hang of it, the possibilities are endless. Why is this only being used for things like rugs or pillows or small little art pieces?
Was this a thought running through your mind quietly, or were you asking these out loud?
I was kind of asking it out loud. So like to Christy, I had asked her at the time, like, can you do this with this? Or, oh, do you think you could do this? And I think that's when she was like, these are good questions to like take on to, Amy. And I was, asking.
Because she didn't have the answers?
I think she's very knowledgeable. She had some of them, but I was, what else can I do with this? Can I do this technique? Can I do that? And she was like, if it sounds like if you want to get serious, this is kind of the next step. And that planted the seed in my mind. I didn't end up going to study with Amy for another, over a year from the time I first learned, but I went home and I made this one coat, which was a lot more difficult than I thought. I thought that the hard part was going to be creating the textile. And it turns out you can't sew it together on a machine, and you have to sew the entire thing together by hand because it's such a thick textile that you can't get the seams close enough. And that's then what was kind of the final nail that like hooked me into this craft, was how complex it was and how unexplored. So it felt like this puzzle that I was discovering. You talked about curiosity before. There were all these unexplored possibilities for this craft. And I realized this was a very deep rabbit hole that I could go down. And so I did. And as you said, saying yes to like that portal, I really stepped through. And I think I had never had something like that capture me before. I will say, other than knowing I was interested in fashion design for a long time, I'm not someone who has had a lot of niche interests that I'll get, I have a favorite movie or I have a favorite, band that I'm obsessed with, or I didn't have a lot of little obsessions like that. And so when this took hold in me, I was excited to see where it went.
And the woman who helped ignite this spark, was she someone who had many years on you, or how did you even find her? And I always love learning about women that help other women. It means a lot to me. And because there's some women that won't take help from other women, or there's some women that won't give the help. They're just like, nope, I'm just not going to do nothing. But I love that. And you were in this relationship with her professionally that feels to me like it was very trusted and intimate, and she was sharing knowledge with you, and you're just sort of in the trenches together. And then from there, you went to another woman mentor, the woman who is Oxford. You said, what was her name?
Amy.
Yeah, Oxford. So you had this sort of circle of women. I mean, I know it, and in some ways it's like, well, of course it's sewing, but on the other hand, it's like, well, no, not necessarily. I mean, this is like, these are women in business. These are business women that are taking they're taking like a traditional, feeling experience to the business world. Like you were in like this real, I mean, you talk about niche. That's like a sub niche. It's like a sub Reddit or something. You know what I
Exactly.
mean?
It's very niche. I
So
mean,
talk about that sort of like feminine female entrepreneurship circle of creativity that you're in. What did that feel like? Did you even notice it? Did you like
I did. And I think that was something too that stuck out to me, having been in the art and fashion worlds, which can feel very catty and competitive. And I think was also something that I didn't respond to when I worked in those industries. And I thought, well, maybe I'm just not cut out for this. If this is what that industry is, and it's not for me. And all of a sudden then kind of stepping into really what is like the craft industry, which again, I hadn't felt like I had known of before. I had thought of myself in art and fashion, and then craft was this kind of adjacent place, but where I found for the most part, I mean, people to just be so kind and giving and open and collaborative. And it's all the things that I am and want to be in the ways I want to be in business. And so then to go and study under Amy in Vermont and to have her be so generous with her knowledge and her time, and just to that really set the foundation for me of my first impression of the craft and also how I wanted to move the craft forward, kind of upholding that same ethos because it had been so generously kind of bestowed onto me. And that's really what led when I started Punch Needle World with wanting to share that knowledge with others in the same giving way.
I love it. And that was one of my questions, which you've already answered. I was like, what's your ethos around this? And you just answered it. I love it. So I want to talk about, I want to talk a little bit about Punch Needle World. That's the name of your company, Punch Needle World. It's so great. This is more of a tactic piece. How did you name your company, first of all, right? And then how did you start it? Was it, I mean, I kind of feel like you said you went down a rabbit hole and you just you're just like, see you later, world. You know what I mean? And I love it. It's Punch Needle World. Like, where did that hit for you?
That was so at first I was just sharing pieces on my personal Instagram account, my art Instagram account. And then once I started sharing, because I work with a lot of other things, but now it's mostly Punch Needle, but I do work with fabric and other types of crafts. So when I started getting a lot of questions specifically about Punch Needle on my art account, I thought, and I had just learned and studied under Amy and become trained as an instructor. I thought, let me create another space that is dedicated to just answering questions about this, because there's enough here that people are asking that kind of deserves its own space. So that's when I created, it started as just an Instagram account without the intention of it becoming a company, as it is now. And I thought, well, I wanted to the word Punch Needle. And I think I had enough foresight to think I wanted this to feel like a space that was global, that was something that could feel like a community for people all around the world. And so that was really where the name came from, kind of Punch Needle World, and this being a little world where we could just dive into and explore all things Punch Needle together.
So what were you doing? Were you writing things on paper, or were you just like, was it rolling through your head? Were you putting things in Google?
No, I think it was a lot simpler than that. I just thought Punch Needle World. I mean, it seems like
just like came out of your head, like boom, Punch Needle World.
Yeah, it was. And then because at that point, it's like I had to just pick an Instagram name. So that's
Don't
where
you love that? I
it
swear.
came from. And then I'm glad it worked.
I mean, I swear to God, like when I coach startups with my company Bird Creative, and I talk to entrepreneurs too. Like literally, the first place I hit is social media. Like it's not anywhere else. Like gotta go there, put the name in, see if you have too many characters or not enough characters. Does anybody else have it? What's the competition there? Like, literally that's how it is. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Because that's not really necessarily how it used to work, but that's how you have to do it now. And so then it sounds like you evolved into a company as opposed to you didn't really like. I'm working with an entrepreneur right now who has a nonprofit starting, and everything is very intentional with this nonprofit. Name, trademarking, website, license, la 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 la. All the social media channels. you kind of started an Instagram channel and then it became a company. So how did you even make that work? Because a lot of people always want to know, how do you start an Instagram and make that a company?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you talking about the different ways to come at it with starting a business, because the truth is I'm someone who normally I would get really hung up in, if I had known I was starting a business, it wouldn't have happened. Like I would have gotten stuck on the name and I would have just thought, I would have just gone in that spiral, because with my own art practice, that's been actually this thing that's been hard for me to navigate, figuring out what it is as a business, because I'm coming at it from that aspect that it needs to be a business. Whereas with Punch Needle World, it started as a genuine place to give and share knowledge. So it was, that was the name that made the most sense for, it's about Punch Needle, it's about community, it's about providing a space to bring people together from all over the world. Punch Needle World. Okay, this is the Instagram name. I started sharing tips. I started sharing people's work that was created so people could see what other people were creating and tagging them and uplifting them. And then, of course, in 2020, when COVID hit, the account really took off even further as people were discovering crafts that they wanted to do while they were stuck at home. And really from there, it became answering the call of what the community needed. So at first, it didn't even have a website. And eventually, I then created a website to go along with it, where I would do blog posts to kind of further expand on the tips that I was sharing through Instagram. I started a list of where people could find punch needle supplies in their different countries all over the world, which was very few places that these tools were available at the time. But these are the questions I would get. So if I got a question, oh, well, that's a good question, I should make a blog post about that. Or, oh, that's a good idea. If people are looking for supplies, maybe I should make a section on the website where I link out to supplies. And that's also ultimately what led to, I created an online course in 2020 because my intention was to teach. I had just signed the lease in January of 2020 on a studio space in downtown LA. And the only way I was going to be able to afford it was by teaching classes. And then when COVID shut everything down, I broke that lease, started working from home. Instead, I created an online course. And then from there, the online course, people said, well, you're telling us to use these tools and materials, but they're really hard to find, or they're too expensive for me, or I can't find them in my area. And that's when I said, okay, well, I'm going to use my production background from when at the time I worked at Coach. I know how to work with factories. I know how to do that communication. So maybe I do need to start my own yarn line. Maybe I do need to look into producing my own supplies. So it kind of evolved from there. And all of a sudden, I have a line of punch needle supplies. I have a yarn line. I'm doing patterns. And yeah, so it evolved in response to what the community needed. And I think if I had sat down and tried to plan it all out in advance, not only would I have gotten stuck, but it just was unimaginable to me that this small niche could even turn into a full-time job. And so I think about that too with other people starting businesses, or again, we can talk ourselves out of things by trying to see the big picture in the beginning, when really all that's required is to take that first step and go in wholeheartedly into the nugget of the business that is calling you. And then I think things evolve from there, which I've had to learn through this process.
I love it. I love it because people are always trying to understand, how do I turn my passion into a real thing? And timing is important, and having niche communities is also important. So I just put out a PDF on how to start your first podcast, and it's something that's going through a workflow with my email platform, Flowdesk. I just put it together, and there's actually a section on niche. Like, this is how you can really create a podcast for yourself. And I try to encourage people, like, you have something you're really interested in, really passionate about. That's the only thing that'll drive and keep you driving through whatever it is you're working on, right? And if you have a podcast, for example, if you decide to launch a podcast, you've really got to find something that you're really passionate about and obsessed about. Otherwise, your damn podcast is just going to die after a couple of months, because it is a lot of work. And if you don't care about it or don't love it, you'll never make it. You'll just never make it. So I really love that. And did you also, I want to move on after one more question about this, but So your company, Punch Needle World, did you just sit down intentionally and make a visual identity, or was this just something random that just came out because you're just kind of in the business, right? I just feel like you're right. I think to myself, oh my God, like you didn't even plan that? How does this even work? Did you come up with your own visual identity? Did you have someone help you do this, or did you?
For Punch Needle World, I ended up hiring a friend of mine who is a graphic designer,
Okay.
and who I had worked with actually at a former company. Loved her work, and we kind of went into one iteration of that, and then actually a couple of years later, we kind of like refreshed the brand. And that was because at that time I was like, okay, I need to at least have like a logo, and what are the colors, and as an artist and a creative, I care about that stuff. So, but again, if I was doing it myself, which in the past I've tried to do, I'll just spin out forever and never settle on something. So I found it really helpful to work with someone whose taste and design sense I trust, and have that guidance from her. So definitely
The reason I asked that question, so this year, I went back to the Sundance Film Festival. I cover the festival as a journalist, and I'm not a journalist professionally, but for Sundance I am. I become a journalist, and I want to talk to people about their film and the process and creativity and design. And this past year, I had a specific goal, and I was under assignment by GDUSA Magazine, which is a really interesting design publication. And my only job was to find movie posters and titling that really resonated, that looked really great. And I was just really hearkening back to the old days of amazing movie poster design, which somehow, I don't know, it's just not the way it used to be. So I did find a couple of films that did beautiful with typography and opening credits and things like that. But what I noticed is the films that did not have good design or good visuals and good art really were because the director of the film didn't have a network of creative relationships where they could make a phone call and say, I've got a designer that I've worked with, or that I've worked with in the past, or that I know does great work. I really need to collaborate. And it was just like, and I wrote an article about this, which is in GDUSA. And I feel very strongly two things. One, you've got to build a network of creatives around you. Even if you're a creative person, you should not, it's not even you can't, but you should not do it all, number one. But number two, when you're not opening yourself up to collaboration, because maybe you're a control freak, or you feel like I can do it all because I'm like this, you really are, you're limiting your creative expansion process. And you're also limiting your ability to grow your business, because when you bring in a graphic designer, right, a visual artist to help you, it transforms everything. And it's obvious. And the other thing too is, as a third thing I'll add, when I notice there's no graphic designer involved in any endeavor of any type of branding, my first thought is that person has no money, they have no network, and they're probably not going to be very good to work with.
Yeah. I think that, I mean, everything you just said, I just second.
I'm right?
Because yes. And look, as someone who does want to do it all and has had to learn over time to let go of that, like I'm still building my own website. Like I didn't do the design, but I'm still taking the photos, I'm editing, I'm doing stuff. But the more I've started to work with and find, and the key is finding those, you're right, the right people. But when you find those collaborative, partnerships and people that you can work with who get it, like the weight that is lifted off of, me when I'm finding the right people to work with, that's having a team. That's having a group of people that, like a creative team that has your back, that gets your vision. And I'm a big fan of, like, I don't love managing people and kind of the idea of having employees that I have to manage, but I love like partnering with people where I'm like, okay, I'm hiring you because you're the expert in what you do. And then releasing that control and learning to do that has actually, it's just, helped my business leaps and bounds when I've been able to let go and put that faith in someone else who really gets it.
And it ain't AI.
Yeah, no, it's not.
It's not. I'm sorry, people.
No.
This is your public service announcement today. Do not hire AI as your graphic designer, please. Do not. I don't care how easy and fast it is or how good you think it looks. Don't do it. I don't care how broke you are. Please stop. Please stop. Get a human. All right. Well, I really love that because it's such an important conversation. And speaking of collaboration, there's an artist that I love, and he's from Chicago, and I actually saw him at my club the other day. His name is Nick Cave. I feel fundamentally he's a fiber artist. I really do. I'm like he's fiber. He's fiber, and fiber is. I feel like he's actually like when I go to museums and I see fiber on the walls, and it's. I look at it and I'm like, wow, what is that? It's so that's so wild. Like who does this? But he's probably the first artist that took fiber to a whole nother level, kind of what you're describing, like what you're talking about yourself. You saw this gap. You're like, why hasn't anybody done this? Now I realize that, his work is also based in, historical African movement and dance. Um, like he's integrated movement, right? And it's like, what is it? And he's gigantic. And I also think for Nick Cave, I know he has artists that work with him. Like he's not, hand stitching everything. It's just like who's the artist that makes the big bulbous, the bulbous sculptures? Like he has teams of people that bring things together for him. He did the Mickey Mouse and the Michael Jackson sculpture. I can't think of his name. And then, even when I think about Nikki de Saint Phalle, she's a French artist and she had people helping her with mosaics. Do you have a dream collaboration at all? Or when I say collaboration, I mean that could be either a person that exists already in fiber in another country, or it could really be, yes, I would love to have a staff of 25 people that I could stand over and help them get to the work that I have in my vision, because I have so many visions that, and I'm not trying to put words in my mouth, but I am thinking a little bit about, I know that only one person can build the one thing, but a piece of me is always like, oh my gosh, like how do we get her work? How do we get her work in Target? How do we get her work at Crate and Barrel? You know what I mean? And so, so put that in the context of a dream collaboration. And you might actually say to me, Ginger, nope, I'm not, that's not it.
I mean, so it's interesting. There's so many avenues for collaboration and what that can mean. And so on the one hand, I still love the making myself so much. And I know that there are so many other artists in all mediums who then they're not even painting their own paintings. They're not even doing their own collage. They're not even doing, they're
Jeffrey
actually
Koons.
Overseeing a team.
Jeffrey Koons. That's what I was thinking of. Go ahead.
Well, yes, that's it. So lots of people who, in sculpture, artists like him, and people who, and then to me though, I think, because I think a lot about the intersection of design, craft, art, and in fashion in my case, and where these intersect, because to me, if you're not making the piece yourself, you're a designer. And you can be a great designer, you can have and then if you, are, because to me, an artist, I think is a little hands-on, at least in my opinion. If I want to consider myself an artist, I do believe that if my finished piece is a physical piece, I at the very least need to know how to make it. Even if eventually I'm saying, okay, I've done this so much that I'm going to teach other people how I do this, and then they're going to help me. So for me, the hands-on aspect is so important that at least for now, and this may change, and I'm open to that changing. One day I'm like, screw this, I don't want to do it all myself anymore. I want to have support. But I really love that process of physically making the pieces. That said, collaboratively, I think both in terms of kind of punch needle world and the craft space, I see a lot of exciting opportunity for collaborations within, with other yarn brands, with other craft brands, to bring the craft of punch needle further into visibility, into the space, particularly with the background that I have, which is rooted in the history of the craft. Because I think now, when things get picked up by, all of a sudden Michael's is making a punch needle craft kit, there's something lost in the fact that this is actually a heritage technique that isn't actually just a fun little kid's craft. And I really, that's really important to me to kind of tell that story in any collaboration that I would do. And then in terms of my own work, in terms of handbags and coats and fashion collaborations, what I'm interested in now, and what I'm so glad you asked this question, because now that I'm done with this book, the thing that I can't wait to do is to get back into making one-of-a-kind pieces. And my dream is to collaborate with artists and illustrators where we can work together to say, okay, their design aesthetic, their designs, or what, what they're picturing, or a piece of their artwork, how can I translate that for them and with them into a coat or a handbag and in punch needle? Because so much art and illustration would translate so well to punch needle. And I have my own aesthetic and I can draw and I do a lot of work with geometric shapes and textures, but I want to see this other work in my medium, and I would love to partner with other creatives. And I have some maybe dream people in mind that I don't want to jinx and maybe, put out there eventually.
Beyonce.
But, illustrate. Oh, I mean, hey, now we're talking daydream. Let's go big.
Beyonce.
Yeah.
Just everything needs to be Beyonce.
And I'm like, hey, there, some collaboration that creating a piece that is in collaboration with an artist or an illustrator to bring their work to life in the medium of punch needle within fashion. And then who could wear those? So it's interesting. I mean, you're a musician, music is such an inspiration to me. And I also love that with punch needle, I can just turn on music and I can lose myself and I can go and punch and it brings me into this meditative zone. One of my dreams too is to create one-off custom pieces for other folks to wear. And to me, musicians are the ultimate people to collaborate with in that way, because they have such a persona, a personality, and I want to see how my work comes to life on them. And I want to see how they bring it to life in a way that is different than when I'm just making a piece and I have it on a hanger. Fashion comes to life on humans, and the same piece can have a different vibrancy or will be styled differently or worn differently on different individuals. And to me, musicians are some of the most just expressive, interesting people that would be a dream to work with too. So
I love that.
I'm excited I'm glad you asked that, because I'm collabs are really where I would love to go in the future.
That's next, right? So I want to, you talk a lot about the zone you go in and the vibe that you're experiencing. Is there a creative ritual or habit that you have that you're comfortable sharing that gets you there? And I sometimes have, moments where I'm like, I can't create anything. I don't know what I need to do to get myself going here. And that's whether I'm having a writer's block thing, or because I'm a writer, or whether I'm actually sitting in front of something where I have to pull something together for a client. What kind of things are you doing? Talk about when you're stuck. And I feel like there's a lot of people right now that are sort of stuck. They're just sort of, and there's a lot of reasons for that. We're in a very challenging political environment. AI feels like it's attacking us. Literally, it feels like we're under attack. It's especially for creatives, especially for artists, it's like some kind of, torture chamber in some ways. You have to figure this out. So, and I think that's causing some people to actually not move. They're just like, what do I do? Has that ever happened to you? And just put it in the context of today. And what kinds of things you're doing to get yourself out of that so that you can create? I don't know, maybe, and I should say, maybe right now you're like, girl, listen, I am in a flow. And right now this is not happening to me. So if that's happening, think about when it did happen. How did you break?
Yeah. I mean, ideas, I feel like I always have a backlog of ideas, in part because of how slow punch needle is. So it takes so long to realize one idea. Where I then get stuck is which one do I pick, and the getting started. And like you said, all the other things in life that can feel like they stall us from doing that, whether it's, being stressed about the political environment and feeling like, what does it mean to make art at this time? Is that even worth anything? Does anyone want to see any art? Is this important? To just, figuring out how to kind of make the space to sit down and create. And I think for me, it's ultimately about just getting started. It's not an amazing answer, but it's actually the simplest one. And it's one I need to remind myself of all the time, which is just doing the work, because I'll spend a lot of time in my head thinking about an idea, thinking about what I need to get started, kind of talking myself out of being able to get started today because I need to have all my ducks in a row or all the materials at the right time. And at the end of the day, once I actually, for me with punch needle, for instance, once I actually just make the time to sit down and thread the needle and get a few of the first stitches in, all of a sudden 15 minutes later, I'm off, and then you can't pull me away for hours. But sometimes it's a little painful just getting started. And I've had to remind myself that like making myself do that, even when it feels hard or not fun, is what kind of gets me into the flow and then always revives that spark if I've found that I've lost it for whatever reason.
I like it that you can handle delayed gratification too, because you mentioned that it takes a very long time to realize your dreams. Have you ever had a surprising or emotional reaction from someone encountering your work for the first time that stands out to you?
I so much of my work has been put out through social media that I don't think I've been able to. I've had really wonderful like emails and comments from people, but I don't usually get to encounter people seeing my work a lot, which a few years ago, in 2023 in Los Angeles, I put on an art exhibition of my fashion pieces. I did 7 pieces. And it was the first time that friends of mine had ever seen my work in person, even people who I lived in Los Angeles with. I had a studio, but I was sharing things online and through my website. And it was really important to me to create a space where I could display the work in the way that I wanted it to be seen, which was as art. So people could come up and it was, the fashion pieces were on mannequins and there were some handbags that were on, pedestals. And as you would see in a museum or an art show, so people could come up close, they could take a look at it. And that was the first time I got to see people's reaction. And I don't think I realized how hard it is for people to really understand what they're looking at when they're seeing things through, the internet or social media. Because friends who, of course, had supported my work for years and been fans and they had heard me talking about it, friends who then saw it in person were, I think, really surprised by the level of complication that went into the pieces. And I had a video that I actually did that I kind of threw together at the end because I'll always kind of take video of myself as I'm working, that I put together that was 14 minutes, 1 minute segments, 14 1-minute segments of me working on different parts of pieces. And it wasn't sped up the way that, now in Reels and TikTok, we make everything really fast. And so watching someone hand sew something for 1 minute is kind of painful to watch because it's kind of boring. To then see 14 1-minute segments in real time of how slow the process is, that was the piece in the show, the video, that actually got the biggest response from people, which was just, oh my gosh, I had no idea how slow. And now that I see that video and frankly, how little it's done in 14 minutes, when they're then able to go back and look at the pieces, there's a renewed appreciation for the work. So that's been, I think, that was that one time that I actually really felt that response and was able to see it real time. And it meant a lot to me to be able to share that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that you put it in this context because I do feel that to me crosses into the area of art when you start looking at some work that artists do and you're just like, what in the they spent how much time doing what? It's almost like the contemporary art museums that have hand like line drawings that people have these really complicated sketches, or people that use pointillism to do 1,000 million things in 1 inch, and you're just like, who has a brain like that, right? I mean, do you consider that piece, was that a large scale project for you? Because one of my questions was, if you could do a public installation, what would it be? Would that be it? I mean, because I almost feel like that's not really a public installation. That's a gallery piece. But if you were to do a public installation, that might not be something in your vision right now in your career. That might be something you need to wait a little bit on.
Yeah, I mean, I think For now, I'm still invested in trying to have people see fashion as art through what I do.
Yes, I
So
love
in
that.
that case,
Yes.
and it's becoming more, over the years, fashion, we see it now in museums, and wearables in galleries,
Wait, what do
but
you see in wearables and galleries?
um, seeing wearables in galleries or like a fashion exhibition at the Met, for
I
instance,
see what
like
you're saying. Got
that
it.
is now more common
Yes. Yep.
than it was a long time ago. And I think even being able to see, um, like for instance, FIT, the Fashion Institute, in New York, has a really wonderful museum that not only now shows, historic garments or, pieces from collections by famous designers, but showcases work that is, artware, one of a kind pieces where artists have made a one off piece that has detailed embroidery or something sewn onto it or something even that's more unwearable and it's truly just an art piece. I think my first dream would be something on a larger scale from what I did on my own in my own small way in 2023. But to put this kind of work out in that context, because I think it challenges people to think, what am I looking at? Is this, it looks like fashion, but it's created with this other kind of craft technique, but that's been meticulously sewn by hand. And it's art and kind of forcing people to examine maybe their own preconceptions of what these categories mean to them and why they might be willing to, pay thousands of dollars for an art piece that is a flat piece stretched on the wall out of this textile. But the moment that it's sewn together, which is actually far more complex, but if it looks wearable, I find that people often devalue things that are functional as opposed to artistic. And I really want to kind of push the boundaries of those. So that would be
Well,
my first dream.
it depends. I mean, I'm thinking about punch needle on athletic shoes. So I think that's not devalued. I have three
Yeah.
sons and they love athletic shoes. So just like the idea of having something like that on a athletic shoe might sort of
Yes.
change your mind about that.
Yeah.
And speaking of the meticulousness of your work, a couple years ago, actually, I think it was during the pandemic. Yeah, it was during the pandemic. We were spending a lot of time at home, and I had candles everywhere. I was doing mantras. Everybody was like, "Are we going to live or die?"
Yeah.
Um, but I interviewed this woman. Her name was Ponte. She has a company in New York called Ponte Wax, and it was fascinating because I asked. I'm a candle. I'm obsessed with candles, and I remember just asking her about wicks. And she's like, "Oh no, you're asking me about wicks." And it was like she had a whole thing about how important it is for her to buy wicks and where she bought her wicks from. And that there are candle makers out here that do not pay attention to the quality of the wicks. And the wicks can make or break your candle. And it was like a whole thing, like her sourcing of the wicks. And I was like, I did not understand or know that I was opening up this and
That's
I
amazing.
loved it. I loved it. So now I'm always like when I have a candle, I'm like, man, they took a shortcut on this wick because this is just
Yeah.
not. It's burning crooked, or it's burning too low, or it's not burning. It was just so I'm kind of want to understand with you because I was actually when I was researching you, I was noticing first of all the quality of your packaging. It looks like your materials, and I mean, do I even call is it yarn? I'm just like I feel like your yarn looks different than the other yarns that I was looking at with punch needle. Um, and you mentioned earlier you were talking about where you source your materials, and they're expensive. They're hard to find, at least back then. Maybe not as much now. Um, you know, and I don't want you to give away all your secrets, but um, can you talk about your sourcing of your materials? Because I'm going to tell you right now, if anybody right now goes to Google or YouTube or even some generative AI, channels like Perplexity or Manus or whatever, and you type in videos punch needle, you're going to see low quality materials, and you're going to see people that are not anywhere near as skilled as Micah. I understand there's a huge range of skill for people that do punch needle. There might be a huge range of materials. I'm not completely sure, but I do feel like you definitely, if I look at it, you are definitely at the top of the skill, the quality, the technique, the attention, and the detail and the sort of excellence of it. Do you have I don't want to go back to what's your ethos around this, but was that intentional for you, or did you learn this, or because it seems like you're in an excellent space compared to other people. But I also will suggest that your approach and your work looks more challenging. It looks like harder.
Yeah, it's, I appreciate that. First of all, with also the fact that you've looked into it and you can tell that there's a range of supplies and
Yes, big
things
time.
that people are doing. And I'm always careful, particularly with Punch Needle World, which is a craft company that really is geared towards beginners. I want to both encourage people to be able to use what they have on hand, but I also think it's really important to encourage people to understand how the tools and materials they use impact the quality of their work and their enjoyment of the craft, their ease of learning it. And there are correct tools and materials to use for this craft. And people don't like saying that, I think, in the craft. They want to say, you can do anything goes. But in fact, when it comes to punch needle rug hooking, this is a traditional textile technique. That the technique exists for a reason, because when you do it correctly, you are making a textile that won't require glue to secure the stitches. You're using fiber that will stand up to being walked on if you're making a carpet, as it was originally kind of intended. And so I encourage people to learn with these tools and materials in the beginning, because it makes understanding how the craft works so much easier. And from there, I'm a big believer in, once you know the rules, then you can break the rules. Whereas if you're using some material and you're just going through it and you don't know why you're using, like, you're not making an artistic choice, you're doing something out of ignorance. And that's a big difference than saying, okay, I know that this is technically the way it's supposed to work, but I'm going to consciously choose to do it this way for this reason. So I think there's a lot of power in learning the basics and the traditional techniques first. And that includes one of the biggest things, which is working with rug wool. So rug wool is really hard to find because it's really scratchy. It's rougher than other wools. It's definitely not something that you would ever have found at craft stores, because you don't want to knit with it. Like, it's too rough to have against the body. It's not comfortable. But when you think about it, you need something really durable like that if it's going to stand up to being walked on day in and day out and make a piece that can last for generations. So sometimes what I'll see beginners doing, or I'll see a YouTube video and it makes me cringe a little bit, is when I see someone making a punch needle rug and they're using like an acrylic or polyester blend yarn from a craft store, and they've spent hours, days or weeks making a rug that I'm looking at, and the second they step on it, the loops are going to be flattened and you can't bring that back. That's not the yarn that should be used for something like a rug. Whereas again, if someone's making an art piece, the sky's the limit for the types of fibers that people want to use, if it's just decorative. But if you're making something like a rug or a pillow, or in the case of, what I do in the book, a fashion piece or a handbag, something that is going to get wear, you need to know, is it okay if this gets wet? How would I clean it if something happened to it? And so for that, knowing the type of yarn and the fibers that you're working with makes a big difference. So I try to balance that education for folks, and I provide a very limited set of supplies that are the basics and the most high quality supplies that you need to get started. But I also then want to encourage people that once you have a handle on the basics, if you're making a piece that doesn't require, it to be sturdy enough to be walked on, go wild, find whatever fibers that you can, find in your local craft store or elsewhere. And the sky's the limit. So it's a delicate balance.
Yeah. I like the conversation around the different types of yarn. I just think about Martha Stewart. She talks about the different types of soil, and she actually has social media content on this soil, what this does, what this should do. And I actually hired a woman last month to repot some of my plants that were in their planters, and they'd been there for 3 years because I bought a bunch of plants during the pandemic. And she was talking to me about different soil, and she was researching the plants to understand what type of soil she should put in this particular plants, whether they were succulents or not. And I feel like it makes a difference if your plant lives or dies. So it's like, why wouldn't it be the same with yarn? Why would you have to take the time, and it is an educational process, and you have a school, right? So Punch Needle World is the school and it's the store. Is that correct?
So Punch Needle World is the company and community kind of space, but then Punch Needle Academy is kind of the name where my online course lives, and where eventually that will hopefully expand to have more tutorials and different, projects specific to, individual projects, whether it's from this book or something else that folks can be able to make.
So can people access that under Punch Needle World?
Yes. So Punch Needle World, I have a section for online courses that will link people out to directly to the foundation course for Punch Needle.
Okay.
And punchneedleacademy.com. That is where it can also be found too through the site that it's currently hosted on.
And then also, I read that you have courses on Domestika, or is that your past life? And now you're kind of moving into your own courses on your own platform.
Yes, I do have a course on Domestika. So I have a course that teaches you how to make a clutch purse.
Okay.
So it really, again, ties into with the fashion aspect.
And why did you use Domestika? Why didn't you run this on your own platform?
So they had reached out to me actually before I had even done my own online course. And then I was supposed to record with them in 2020, but then COVID happened. I was supposed to fly. I was very sad because I was supposed to fly to Madrid and record with them in 2020. And I was so excited about getting to do that.
Oh, no.
And then COVID happened. And so I couldn't do that anymore. But I knew all of a sudden then it became more important for me to have an online course, and in particular, an online course that was like the foundations of the craft. So that's the course that I recorded and did on my own, which is like everything I would teach in an in-person class, but people can access it from anywhere in the world.
Got it.
And then I still
would you still do that? I mean, I ask because there's some people that are, sometimes they debate between, should I hire a third party or should I do it on my own? I personally feel there is a benefit to a third party, but I also know that the revenues are reduced when you do that. Your control and it's like a whole thing, but
massively reduced. I mean, it is not a moneymaker.
Good to know.
I think there's a lot of people who think that's the case. And for me, it was about marketing. And so I specifically said, okay, I will still do the Domestika course. We did it a year later. And by that point, they had opened up a location in New York City. So I flew from LA to New York. Not as fun as Madrid, but I went to New York to film that in 2021. And that's when that course came out. And for me, the reason I was excited about Domestika is because they are a company that started in Spain and they were new to the US. So they had a massive following in Spain and elsewhere. And because Spanish was the first language that they work in, having English speaking teachers was newer for them on the platform. And they would translate and have subtitles for their courses in all sorts of other languages. So for me, that was something I knew I wasn't going to be able to have all these subtitles on my own courses. They also just reached a whole bunch of people around the world that I wasn't able to reach. And so that was for me, the reason that I did that. I said, this is going to be a great opportunity. And yet it's been interesting over time because everyone that purchases the Domestika course, I mean, I see maybe 36 cents to $1 if I'm lucky from a sale from those courses. So it's interesting.
Painful,
whereas when people say which one should I do, and I'm like, well, they're different, but like really, if you want to support the artist and the creator, you need to go with people's own platforms because that's not where anyone is making any money.
Right. Yeah. And that's really, that's good knowledge and good information. I'm a strong believer in intellectual property and self-determination and ownership. So, that's my whole thing. So I want to talk about your book, Punch Needle Fashion. It's due to release this month, right? Or is it out now?
Yes, it's coming out in just over a week.
It's over a week, right? This is great. Really good timing for things that are happening in your family. So, you know, Punch Neil Fashion, I can't wait to get it. I did get a preview of it and just very high level. It's beautifully designed. And the photography is gorgeous. The typography is beautiful. It just, it just looks like something that I'd want to buy and do and learn from. I just really, the colors are great. It really does align with your brand. I think that what I like about your fashion is the colors. I don't know. You obviously have a lot of color theory experience, but it's just everything's balanced really beautifully. And the book expresses that. Is this your first book? And like, what made you decide to write a book? Because I feel like you're doing a lot of things. You're really busy, and really, I mean, writing a book and producing a book, it's no joke. And I want to understand: is this your first book? And then I guess the next thing I'd want to know is, it looks like you have a publisher, and I want to know why you didn't start your own publishing company. Similar, it's the same question of the Domestica. It's like you could have started your own publishing company and created the book yourself, right? And then that way you have multiple other books you produce under your own publishing company. So talk about why did you decide to do this book, and why did you decide to go through a publisher to do it?
Yeah, I didn't initially want to write a craft book. This is my first book. And it was something that I had maybe been asked if I would write a book like this at some point after I had been running Punchy World for a while and doing my own work. And I initially resisted the idea because I was afraid that writing a craft book would more firmly place me in the craft category and would undermine the work that I felt like I was trying to do as an artist and a designer. And it was that, some of my own bias, but also some of the way that, we perceive people when these things happen, I was already receiving a lot of, kind of struggling with people seeing my artwork and seeing the pieces I would make and kind of saying, "Oh, will you give me a pattern for that coat that you made?" And I was learning this was kind of how the craft industry saw things that people make as like free to use for them, and kind of this idea that everything should be available for them to copy in a way that was shocking to me, coming from, of course, an art and fashion background. You would never ask an artist or a fashion designer to just like give you a pattern to recreate the work that they do. And so finding kind of this balance, it took me a little while to come around to the idea of, and of being able to then share that knowledge and not being afraid of teaching people the techniques that I felt like I had really worked over 7 years to hone into the process that I was doing. So eventually, first it just took time. I've been doing it for so long. I feel really confident in what I do and confident in the places I want to take the craft, that sharing what I'm sharing now. I know how hard it is to complete this. So only people that are really dedicated in wanting to complete these pieces will take the time to learn this and punch the pieces. And I'm ready to like put that out in the world and release a little bit of the control over thinking that these are just my concepts and seeing what other people do with it. And the other piece of it was feeling like I could create a craft book that felt like an art and fashion book, first and foremost. Because I don't use craft books. I didn't grow up using craft books, so it was a little bit foreign to me. But I looked through a lot of art books. I love coffee table books. Those are all that, and when I spend money on a book that is my inspiration, that's something I know and love. So I said, well, how can I make a book that feels like the kind of book that I would want to purchase, even though I don't consider myself someone who, is a craft book user? And one of my biggest inspirations actually was cookbooks. So cookbooks are, I think, that beautiful intersection of there are instructions and yet it's aspirational and beautiful. And even though I am not following the, recipe and creating these things, I think cookbooks are some of the most beautiful and well-designed books out there. So between that, as a template, I realized there was maybe a space for a book like mine that could again, live in this intersection of things, and be the type of coffee table book that someone who didn't necessarily intend to actually make any of these projects could still appreciate as a lover of art, of textile, of fashion, and find some joy in the book.
I love that. So, there's a great book you should take a look at, Virgil Abloh, and it was put together by the Museum of Contemporary Art when he had, he's of course passed away, and he was passed away. Actually, was he passed away when the book came out? I don't remember, but I just think about your work, the fact that it's art and fashion and also craft, which is really an interesting intersection. I understand your reticence about craft, right? Because it kind of feels like it's diminishing your work and it's diminishing your vision, because craft is like little kids are doing craft in kindergarten. You know what I mean? They're doing crafts in kindergarten. That's how you think about it. Or they go to the local, summer camp and they're doing summer crafts. I get that. But I think about, the museum quality books, and I think about, you really should pick up Virgil Abloh's book. It's blue. And I'm blanking on the title because I literally just bought it a couple weeks ago, and I actually did a little Instagram post about it because I'm so excited about it. But it does show, it's like a book of pages which shows his inspiration and his fashion and his corporate relationships with different fashion brands. And I do feel like there's a place for that for you, maybe your next book, where you can sort of and I haven't actually seen the full book. I have the PDF, which isn't the same as like an actual book turning pages. Maybe I'll get a copy. But the idea of this being a museum quality experience, because that's what you're creating, is like a real special space. The other thing is there's something beautiful about craft, because for goodness sakes, I mean, there's a lot of money to be made in that space. I mean, I'm just thinking like from a financial perspective, you've got a lot of women out here, and men too, that are making their own stuff, and they're going to places to buy materials, and they're going to buy, fibers and fabrics, and they're making their own colors, and it's just, the whole, and then of course you have the brands that make these things. Like, they'd want to be involved. They'd want to be associated with someone like you, Micah, that has a huge audience, that is really meticulous about the craft, and you're not actually making things for a 3 or 5-year-old who's just figuring out their pincer grip and is making you know what I mean? Not diminishing that experience, because hey, the next huge designer might be that kid. But I just feel like, this book that you've created, and it's your first book, and I think it's beautiful. And congratulations, by the way, on this book.
Thank you so much.
I think to me, it's a good place to dip your toes, before your next vision, because I hear the things between the lines that you're saying. You've got much bigger things that you're trying to do on the horizon, right? Because you have this art space. You have an art creative space that is not consumer based.
Yeah.
It's not even maker based. It's like a whole nother thing. And I get what you're saying in the beginning, where you're like, how do I explain this to people?
Yeah.
I don't know how to explain this. I mean, it's almost impossible. I mean, Virgil Abloh didn't explain anything. He just did it.
Yes.
Nick Cave didn't explain anything. He just did it.
Yes. And that's where too, like, making art, when you realize, like, well, if I knew how to explain it, I wouldn't need to make the art. Like, I'm trying, like, why do I need to explain it? Like, look at it. Like, you tell me, and that really is, like, and I think actually the book, though, now I'm so proud of it, because it actually feels like the thing that bridges this gap for me in my, like, artist self and my creative craft entrepreneur self.
I love
and
it.
This book is both, and it does that in a way that it is very much me as an artist writing this book, and it's my work and my pieces and my design aesthetic. But then, because it has that educational aspect, it has that toe in craft, and that's partly going back to, I mean, you asked initially also a question about choosing to work with a publisher. And that for me also was a piece of that, which was having support in the beginning of that kind of established, a publisher that would understand this vision that I was trying to do and help me bring that to life in a way that I wasn't sure I would be able to do on my own. And they really got the vision for it. And it just felt good, again, as we talked about, to have support in that. Could I have tried to do it on my own? Maybe, but it felt really good to have a team that also believed in that idea and vision. So happy with how it turned out. And I hope that it does, kind of bridge all of that together.
I like it. Well, I have some rapid fire questions I want to ask you. Some writer around Robin stuff. I know you were not prepared for this at all. But I want to know what kind of 10-day vacation would you like to take next? Vacation anywhere in the world that's not work related, but maybe it is. Maybe you're like, I need to go somewhere and look at that fiber.
Well, I am about to go to Madrid in July. So that's on my mind, and that's going to be my 10-day vacation. So I've never been to Madrid, and I'm really excited.
Oh, that's awesome. And what is your go-to day-to-day outfit? Like when whether you're creating or not, like what are you doing fashion-wise?
My go-to outfits are actually very basic. I'm a jeans and a white button-down girl. So I work with a lot of color, and yet what I tend to wear is about as neutral as you can get. But lots of different types of jeans and lots of different styles of white button-down shirts. That's the
I'm admiring your necklace. Tell me about what you're wearing on your neck.
This necklace it's actually my birthstone. I'm a Scorpio. I was born in November, and so
that's a Scorpio. Yeah, that explains everything.
And I rarely I don't wear a lot of jewelry, and I didn't wear necklaces for a really long time, and then I got this on a trip I was in with my mother-in-law and my sister-in-law a few years back, and I've been wearing it every day ever since.
I love it. It's so beautiful. So where do you go over and over again for inspiration? What do you do? What do you look at? Do you listen to music? What's happening?
It's really nature for me. And now that I've been living in California and beginning to camp over the past handful of years, my partner and I will be out with our dog. And that has just, I think, opened up my mind so much to all the beauty of nature, from, the desert to the forest and the ocean and all the different types of plants and flowers that are available. So to me, if I need a fresh start, I'm trying to get away for the weekend and come back refreshed.
For colors, are you pretty much on the same color palette you've been your entire career, or what's happening with you color-wise?
So I didn't use almost any color in my work until I came to California. In New York, when I was not punching, but I was working with fabric, I was, black, white, gray, beige, cream, like those were the colors. And then in California, both, I think, due to, again, the weather and the sun and the colors that existed there, and then just working with yarn and fibers, that's what inspired my love of color. Because when there's all these incredible color palettes to work with from fiber, that itself also then became my inspiration.
If you had one celebrity that you could meet, someone that would actually put you in so much awe that you might not be able to speak. I'm talking about someone that you would stand in front of and be like literally frozen. But you would not stay frozen. I'm just saying somebody that...
This is so hard. I don't...
Really?
Yeah, no, this is the kind of... I think the people that I would say, there's so many different... I think I could think across, musicians. I could think across artists, actors, actresses. But I've never been I'm like a fangirl of one person in this way. So that's a really hard one for me. I'm a little put on the spot.
I like to ask this question because when you're an entrepreneur and you are in a creative space, sometimes you do find yourself in front of celebrity, and you don't want to fumble the bag. You want to be ready. As Spike Lee just recently said, everything does not have to be a transaction. Everything doesn't have to be monetized. He said something like that. But I do think that, sometimes if I was in front of Rihanna, for example, I would love to just sort of show up and be in the background and watching her on a photo shoot. I just want to be like in the room and I just want to see how it works. Like, I want to see that. I want to know, how does this work? Or it might be interesting to say, okay, if you're working, Rihanna, what's it like when you have your baby on your hip as you're working? Like, what's that like? Because I went through that and I'd be curious to know, how does she create?
Yeah.
And how does she create in an environment of motherhood? Because I told you when we first got on, all three of my boys are in town. Yes. And it's been a while since all three have been in town in a regular season versus holidays, right? Holidays, holidays are holidays. But when they're here in a regular season, I'm like sitting here thinking, how in the world do I have any opportunity to get anything done here? So that's why I was kind of thinking about it. And oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, just saying it's interesting because it's like, I think it's more, I don't really get starstruck in that way with one person, but to your point of, I would just love to be a fly on the wall with anyone who is so high performing. And there are so many people across these categories, as you said, that are just putting out incredible works, and they, I'm sure, have just teams around them too that support them. But to watch that process, and that is something I admire so much, even if I am not, listening to their music all the time or consuming their art all the time. But those are the people like who I just admire, who are doing their things and at such a high level. I liked your Rihanna example of just being able to watch that for what she does.
Last question. So I'm going to Italy myself in July for work and other things. And you may not have an answer to this because you haven't been there in so long. But is there some place in Italy that I should, like, I'm going to Milan, Florence, Tuscany, Venice, Rome, Modena, as someone corrected me. I'm just like, I feel like I'm walking into a world that I'm not as familiar with as you are. There's so much fashion in Italy. Do you have a place I should start? I don't even know what to do. I'm like, should I just go look at antiquities and go to the museum? Is that all I should do?
Oh my gosh. I mean, also just, I'm like, eat everything.
Everything?
That's the first, I'm like, oh, fashion.
Eat my way through Italy.
I mean, it's been a long time since I've been in Milan, but I have family in Italy. I'm actually a dual citizen with Italy and the U.S. So
Do you speak Italian?
I speak a little bit of Italian. It was much better back when I was spending more time there. But you being in Florence and Tuscany, that is one of my favorite places. And again, it's been a long time. So in terms of specific recommendations, but to me, Florence for the architecture and the art, and of course the fashion, just the whole ethos of Italian life, of appreciating beauty, whether it's in the buildings, in the everyday, in dressing up to go out, in the food. That's something that just completely, I'm enamored with. So I hope you find that same joy in Italy when you go.
I'm definitely going to hit you up after online and just say, hey, I'm thinking about going here. What should we do? Well, listen, this has been a wonderful conversation, Micah. I've really enjoyed this. Everybody, we're talking to Micah Clasper Torch. She's an amazing punch needle artist. And she's got some wonderful fashion. She's got a new book. She's got a bunch of companies. She's an entrepreneur. She's got huge dreams and huge vision, and she's still working on all of it. And it's fantastic. I really want to thank everybody for joining me today on the Honest Field Guide podcast. If you want to look for Micah, go to Instagram and go to Clasper Torch, which is CLASPERTORCH. And you can find all of her work there. You can also do a search of Micah Clasper Torch on any search engine, including any generative AI search engines. You'll find some things on generative AI with Micah, but there's a lot of really good information. She's all over YouTube as well. I want to thank everybody for joining me on the Honest Field Guide podcast. Thank you so much, Micah, for coming on.
Thank you so much, Ginger. This has been so much fun. You're amazing.
Great. Well, we'll see everybody next time on the Honest Field Guide podcast. Have a great rest of everything. Talk to you soon. Bye. The Honest Field Guide is produced by the team at Burt Creative, where brand and multi-channel strategies are designed to help you get attention, grow, scale, and keep up with the pace of change. The music on the podcast is written and performed by Utah Carroll. You can find their songs everywhere online to buy or stream. The opinions expressed on the Honest Field Guide are solely those of the host and guests.